Action.
Hi, my name is Tom Moore. I'm an award-winning writer in St. John's, Newfoundland, and I love to tell stories. St. John's is the capital of our little province, Newfoundland and Labrador. It's located here on the far east coast of the island. By way of reference, United States of America and all my cousins down in New York and Boston are way down here. We're right up north of the coast of Maine. That'd be Canada in that way. And over my way, you can see this is where John Cabot landed at Bonavista. Oh, 400 years, 1497. That's what, 500 years ago, more than that. And here's the Atlantic Ocean. And the next landfall you find this way is Ireland. So tonight I want to do a story that I wrote, especially for my American cousins, if I may. Here where we are, and I guess where you are, the leaves are falling and we're getting into the season of autumn. And winds are getting cool. But it's a nice season to be cuddling up with somebody if you have someone special in your life. And it's a nice season to have someone read you a story. Because this COVID-19 virus has caused havoc for people like myself, writers or entertainers and certainly musicians. And a lot of us have had to go to the internet to keep in touch, to communicate with, to tell our stories to our readers, our audience, hopefully you. So I got a special story for you tonight. It's really the only parable, the only allegory that I ever wrote. And it's called Marica Marries a Lion. This is true. It's a story about a woman who actually marries a lion in every sense of the term that's in your mind. You'll see. Here we go. Fasten your seatbelt. Marica Marries a Lion by Tom Moore. Marica White was an American medical missionary in Kenya. She was Harvard trained and full of compassion for humanity. A big hit among the Nairobi socialites, she was often consulted by UNESCO, WHO, and other do-good organizations. Corrupt government officials flattered her and offered assistance with her work, building schools and hospitals. She knew they were stealing funds for their Swiss bank accounts, but she turned a blind eye to their bad deeds to continue her good ones. She broke the heart of a young doctor from Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, who quit his position and returned to France, distraught. But the man she loved was a Kenyan professor of engineering who came home from MIT to build bridges across his country. He taught at the university, and she soon found herself auditing his classes. She was touched by the practical, simple magic he brought to complex problems. She agreed to sit on the board of his charity called Lion's Work. In a month, she was sleeping with him. And in a year, they were married. She was happy, very happy, and came to respect his calm approach to setbacks and his abiding faith in the goodness of life. One day, he was killed by a lion while measuring off a rural bridge. The casket was closed, and Marica grieved for months. Her family flew in from Chicago, and everyone assumed she would bury her husband and return home. But she did not. My life is not over. My husband would want me to continue his work. So she waved goodbye to her troubled parents at the airport and strode back out into the stifling African heat. One day, in the jungle, sitting in her jeep, Marica was approached by a big lion. He looked old and not hungry or scary. He walked confidently and had an orange face and a huge orange mane. She watched him closely with her engine running, ready to pound the gas pedal to the floor. He sniffed at her jeep, then sniffed the rear bumper, and then he lay down in the grass. Marica drove away, her heart pounding. That night, she laughed on the phone with friends in Chicago about the strange lion, past his prime, a bit fat, big orange head resting on his paws, one eye open, then shut, then open, shut. As she lay in bed, she remembered the big bushy tail sweeping the grass behind him, even as he seemed to sleep. The next day, he was there again, barely concealed in the jungle. After work, she drove her jeep slowly along the road where the lion had been, her heart dancing in her breast. There he was, lying in the same spot. She parked and watched him watching her. He came up to the jeep and sniffed it again. He approached her door with the window open and sniffed at her. Then he licked the door. He did not look directly at her. Her motor was still running, her foot on the pedal, her hands on the wheel. But then she let go of the wheel and slowly reached out her hand. He looked, sniffed, and licked it with a big pink tongue that felt like coarse, wet sandpaper. He lay down in the grass beside the road, just under her window. Marica turned off the jeep and listened to the sound of her beating heart. The lion closed his eyes and perhaps slept. She watched him and waited. It was comfortable and cool of the evening as it settled upon them. She awoke with a start when her head hit the steering wheel. He was gone, and it was dark. She drove home feeling disappointed and foolish. These visits repeated every day for a week. She did not work on Saturday, but drove out anyway. On this day, the lion walked over to the passenger side and looked in at her through the open window. "What?" she asked. "Do you want to get in?" She started to laugh at this idea, but stopped. "Do you?" The lion said nothing. She looked hard into his eyes for some answer, but he was looking past her. "This is crazy," she said, and drove away. But 50 yards down the road, she stopped. She felt a loss, like she had forgotten something or left her purse. She laid her forehead on the steering wheel for a calming thought, but none came. She slowly backed the jeep up to 50 yards. He had not moved, and looked in through the passenger window as he had before. Marica reached over and opened the door an inch, just to see what he would do. A big paw hooked the door open with a sweep that made her gasp. He was so big she wondered how he would fit into her Jeep. There was no roof, so he put one paw atop the windshield and swung his haunches aboard. The Jeep sank down on its springs. She glanced over in awe, but the lion just looked down the road ahead of them. The stink of his fur and drool from his mouth were nauseating. But Marica was too excited to care. His head loomed over the roof and his mane wafted in the breeze. When they came to her white house, he jumped out over the door. She felt the Jeep rise back up on its springs. He sauntered across the clearing, sniffing the wind and sizing up the place. He went around the corner of the cabin and waited by the back door, his big tail sweeping left and right as he walked. But she opened the front door and went in alone. She fixed a stiff drink and took it to the back and sat looking out at him. He did not lie down, nor did he look at her. He just waited, tail sweeping left and right. Finally, she opened the back door and he walked in and lay down by the bookcase. He filled half the room, and she would have to step over him to get into her bedroom. Her Siamese cat, Pretty, jumped and ran up the wall, landing atop the china cabinet. Her guinea pig, Pokey, munched on a stick of celery from the safety of his cage. When she got up the next morning, the lion went into the jungle. He left no trace, and she didn't know what he did during the days. It was like having another cat, a very big cat. One evening he came home licking his lips. He looked right at her, but she turned away and made tea. At first, no one in the village noticed the lion. He was the color of everything around him and could disappear behind a bush. But one day, a town elder visited to drop off a letter. He opened the door and faced a grim surprise. The lion half rose onto his front legs and gave a deep, guttural growl that rattled the whole house. China shook and tinkled in the cabinet, and the man's bladder released before he slammed the door and ran. When Marica arrived, 2 small police cars lit up the yard in blue, red, and white. She explained away her new pet to the incredulous officers and the frightened elder. Everyone left shaking their heads, and Marica knew she had a problem. Soon she was a local celebrity. The news networks called the situation unusual and against our norms. They said it broke all conventions. Wolf Blitzer said 100 times that it was unprecedented. But it did not break the law. The lion lolled in beautiful indifference. He slept on the floor and filled the house with a pungent, lethal ambrosia. One day, she stroked his head as she stepped over him. He tensed, but then relaxed and purred, the deepest purr she had ever heard. It came across the centuries from ancient caves of our ancient ancestors and their house cats. She stopped in mid-stride and massaged him behind the ear, thinking she was the first human to ever touch him. Pokey glared down at them from the china cabinet. One night, she sat reading as the lion slept at her feet. She came upon Lord Byron's epitaph for his large Newfoundland dog, Bosun, and she read it aloud. Beauty without vanity. Strength without insolence. Courage without ferocity. All the virtues of man without his vices. Marica looked across the room at the big dozing head, and she could feel herself falling in love. She loved his dignity, the quiet, classic discipline of his routine, and his respect for her. It was like her husband had come back to life, and she had regained a lost past. They came out of the house and walked around together, the crazy American and her pet lion, whose head came up to her chest. The village recoiled at first, but soon accepted them as another odd couple. Some said Marica had been driven mad by her recent grief. The lion said nothing. But soon he was part of this new normal. He walked past the village goats and sheep without even looking. Of course, people knew that it was a different story out in the jungle. Those gazelles and gnus were on their own. Another elder observed that there was a precedent for keeping a wild animal. Years ago, an old lady had been permitted to keep an injured cheetah in her house because the creature was considered to be her spouse. The old lady was loved by the village and had grown senile. So the villagers saw no harm in the arrangement. A marriage ceremony had been performed to pacify her. This was just another wild cat, the elder concluded, and another crazy lady, someone else observed. So, Marica and the lion were married. She wore the same beautiful white dress she had worn at her first wedding. Lace and silk, no veil, no train. The village headman performed the ceremony in Bantu. So Marica didn't understand a word. No one knew if the lion understood Bantu, but he stood by her side as the little priest danced and circled around them, sprinkling various dusts and splashing certain sacred liquids. Some thought that he showed fine courage and faith because the lion was as tall as he was. People came to the wedding, shook their heads, and went home. Marica's parents refused to attend. Her friend Jane came from Chicago, cried throughout the whole ceremony, and then flew home without uttering one coherent, non-blubbering word, either in English or Bantu or lion. That night, the lion came to Marica's bed. After all, they were married now. She stared at the wall as he settled down on the soft mattress behind her, pushing her to the edge. The legs and frame could not handle his 500 pounds and crashed to the floor. Soon he was snoring, and she was looking up at the ceiling from a broken bed. The next day, Pretty, the Siamese cat, disappeared. Neighbors said that she would be found. The elder, who peed himself, was more forthright. "Well, he's a lion. What do you expect?" he said. That night, she sat with Byron's poetry in her lap again. But she was looking at the lion. She poured herself a drink and stared at his big, tawny head. "You ate Pretty, didn't you?" she heard herself say. Her drink slashed slightly over her wrist. "Didn't you?" she charged. Pokey looked up from his celery stick. The lion yawned and looked away. In a non-committal manner. "Don't do it again," Marica shouted. And Pokey agreed. But Pokey and Marica aren't around anymore. And if I have to tell you what happened to them, you haven't been listening very carefully. I'll end my story with an image of jaws the width of your open knees and muscles the size of your thighs and incisors the length of your splayed fingers. Evolution has been kind to the lion with the orange face, but there's no place for him in Marica's white house. The end. Thank you for listening.